whatever is just and pure. The scale of justice, those arms that are outstretched. When we think about what is just, I think I've shared with you that people want what's fair. And I believe that we have a very unfair God. And I'm grateful that God is not fair. Because if God were fair, none of us would have anything that we enjoy. Because it's not fair that Christ should bear the burden alone for all that we've done and not done. As Jasmine said so beautifully in her prayer, every day we get up, and there's some things we do we ought not have done, and there's some things we should have done that we just didn't do. Each morning we've got to get up believing and knowing that if the Holy Spirit will guide and direct us, that we can do those things we need to do and not do those things that we don't need to do. Whatever is pleasing. Now, I struggled with this one a little bit because that may be a big part of our problem. We're a culture who loves to be pleased. We're a culture who wants the latest and greatest, and we want others to be at our beck and call. But what is pleasing, if we are true to who we are, is to serve others. This quote from one of the commentaries I read is this text this morning. Our text from Phillipians is found 3 different times of the year in the Revised Common Lectionary, and one of those times of the year is on Thanksgiving. As we think about in a few weeks giving thanks, and as we come today on our Commitment Sunday, on that day when we pledge in faith to make a financial contribution to the church, this is really a day of thanksgiving. We are offering to God our thanks for all that God has already done and will continue to do in our lives. And so I kind of am preaching this Philippians text from this Thanksgiving pericope. Properly understood, thanksgiving excludes the excesses of self, those urges we have for God to satisfy our needs as if they were the only needs. Thanksgiving, as Paul understood it, is uttered as a response to God's indescribable gift. It begins when we recognize that God's own giving was an act of consummate self-giving. The most appropriate response is an act in which we see ourselves as recipients of grace, not petitioners of grace. It is that which we experience best if we receive it without having first asked for it. To think that we receive it because we ask it is misunderstood. We do not receive and enjoy God's grace because we've begged for it or asked for it. We receive God's grace because God has given that grace freely. There's not a thing in the world we can do to earn it. And so grace is just that. It comes to us. And if we're going to have true pleasure and joy in life, we offer that same grace to others without having first have to be asked for it. We give without having to be asked. We offer without being encouraged. We do those things in a response to that which has already been done for us. Whatever is commendable. Again, we think about our text from last week, and there's the Pharisee and the tax collector. And the Pharisee is so glad he's not like the scum of the earth who treat people bad and who do all those awful things, and that he gives 1/10 of all that he has. And I've reminded us to not too quickly jump on the back of the Pharisee, for in our judgment of the Pharisee, we have become the Pharisee. Because just like the Pharisee, we want to be seen doing good things. Again, this word commendable, as we think about it in the context of the Pauline text, is commendable in the eyes of God. What is it that we are doing that is pleasing to God? How are we reaching people in a way that pleases God and makes God smile? If there's anything of excellence, excellence is such an important word. There are so many words in our world, in our English language, and in our culture and society today. But I want to bring us back to this word excellence that we've kind of kind of worked throughout this month. I want to remind you that excellence for me is doing the very best with all that God has given you. Excellence is doing our very best with all that God has given us. Last week we talked about the fact that it's all relative. Each of us have been given different gifts. To be certain, there are people that can play golf better than me. There are people that can run faster than I can. There are people that can do a lot of things better than I can. But there's no one who can do exactly what I do with the gifts that God's given me, because each of us has been gifted in a unique and special way to do the work to which we've been called. Each of us has been gifted in a special way. Every person in this sanctuary, no matter how young or how old, has a gift, and that gift can continue to be given no matter what. Excellence is using that gift to do great things for God. Excellence is what we should be expecting of ourselves and of others. We cannot just be good enough anymore, because good enough is just not good enough. Let me remind us one more time, when I say that, I don't mean to use that in a way that makes us feel bad about ourselves. I don't want us to beat ourselves up. What's the character, the Al Franken character from Saturday Night Live? I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. I'm not talking about the need for self-help and self-promotion. I don't want to beat us up, because we are all created in the image and likeness of God. Therefore, we are good enough in God's eyes. And don't let anyone ever tell you any differently. But just because we're good enough in God's eyes doesn't mean we should rest on our laurels. Doesn't mean we shouldn't still strive for greater things. Because God loves us just the way we are, and will always do so. But God expects more. God expects our very best. We need to demand excellence from ourselves, from our local congregation, from our church, from all of Christendom. We need to expect excellence in the very best from our leaders, from those that we serve and those that serve us. I get so frustrated. I get so frustrated to live in a world where people get by with the very least amount of effort. I get very frustrated in a world, and particularly in our country, where we have so much, that people don't recognize the sacrifices that have been made that we might have those things. I get so frustrated to think that God gave that indescribable gift, and that we somehow might squander that gift because we're not willing to stick our neck out. That we're not willing to step up to the line and be the people that God's created us to be. Whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure and pleasing and commendable, if there is anything of excellence or anything worthy to be praised, think about these things. It's a way of life. It's not just on Sunday mornings or Wednesday evenings or some time that we perceive to be church time. It's from the time we wake up in the morning till the time we go to bed at night. It's putting our mind in the right frame of reference, that we expect excellence from ourselves and others. You've got to keep doing these things. As we've read elsewhere, just as an athlete exercises self-control in all things, so we must exercise self-control so that we too might be excellent. This church, this congregation is historic. We've existed in this very spot since 1903. We've existed in this city for over 150 years. We have done great and excellent things, and we will continue to do more great and more excellent things, because that is what God is calling us to do. There are people just beyond these walls that need us to be excellent and need us to be great. And we need to offer to them God's gifts without them having to ask us first. We need to provide a place that is excellent for them to come and receive God's grace, know of God's mercy, and to hear of God's love. We have got to be the church of excellence. Came across a poem this week. Y'all know Charles Osgood, who is well known for his CBS News show Sunday Morning, and he's also on the radio, and he's known as CBS's Poet Laureate. Charles Osgood will often share his commentary in verse in a poem. Several years ago, he offered this poem. It's entitled, Pretty Good. There once was a pretty good student who sat in a pretty good class and was taught by a pretty good teacher who always let pretty good pass. He wasn't terrific at reading and he wasn't a whiz-bang at math, but for him, education was leading straight down a pretty good path. He didn't find school too exciting, but he wanted to do pretty well. And he did have some trouble with writing, and no one had taught him how to spell. When doing arithmetic problems, pretty good was regarded as fine. 5 and 5 needn't always add up to 10. A pretty good answer was 9. The pretty good student was happy with the standards that were in effect, and no one thought it was sappy if his answers were not quite correct. A pretty good class that he sat in was a part of a pretty good school, and the student was not an exception. On the contrary, he was the rule. The pretty good school that he went to was right there in pretty good town, and no one ever noticed he could not tell a verb from a noun. The pretty good student, in fact, was a part of a pretty good mob, and the first time he knew what he lacked was when he looked for a pretty good job. It was then when he sought a position, he discovered that life can be tough. And he soon had a sneaky suspicion, pretty good might not be good enough. The pretty good town in our story was part of a pretty good state, which had pretty good aspirations and prayed for a pretty good fate. There once was a pretty good nation, pretty proud of the greatness it had, but which learned much too late, if you want to be great, pretty good is in fact pretty bad. Pretty good is not good enough. Unless we get jumping on this pretty good school in this pretty good town, let me reread that last portion for you. There once was a pretty good church, pretty proud of the greatness it had, but when it learned much too late, if you want to be great, pretty good is in fact pretty bad. There once was a pretty good family, pretty proud of the greatness it had, but which learned much too late, if you want to be great. There once was a pretty good business. There once was a pretty good. We can fill in the blank. And the same thing occurs to me. I'm grateful for this. Our God is not just good enough. Our God is more than enough.
All of you is more than enough for all of me, for every thirst, every need. You satisfy me with your love, and all I have in you is more than enough. You are my supply, my breath of life.